And as Greg said, just a lot of fun tools that I have in my lab to kind of play around with golf swings. And so I'll just kind of jump right in. I'll say that I think there are two types of people in the world. There are the type of people who measure grip strength and the type of people who should measure grip strength. And I'm definitely the person who does measure grip strength, basically on anyone that I can find. I carry my dynamometer with me. I don't have it here because I knew there'd be one. But I carry one with me in my car, in my backpack. And so these are just two of my most recent subjects. My friend on the left there, he just turned 91 years old, and I shook his hand 3 weeks ago, and he about crushed my hand. And I told him some of the work that I do in grip strength, and I went over to his house a few days ago, and he said, "I know why you're here. You brought that stupid little device to measure my grip strength." And I said, "Yes, I did." And he squoze, and he got, that number there is 36.6 kilograms, which is a 91-year-old is pretty extraordinary. It's hard to find a population of 91-year-olds to test their grip strength on. It would put him at about average for a 60-year-old, and for sure in the top 5-ish percentile of even 80-year-olds. He's also proud of that because in the last year he's recovered from pancreatic cancer. So I measured his grip strength. The cute little girl on the right, that's my youngest daughter, Hazel. And anytime I pull the device out, the kids always want to see how hard that they can squeeze. And so she's just sitting at about 7.7 kilograms. We've got a little bit of work to do, but I think she is cute while she does do it. And so my thing about grip strength, and that's kind of where I'm going to start today, focusing on the two connections in the golf swing. The first being the hands, the grip, the force through the handle, pressure. And the second one, the feet, the legs, the ground reaction force. And I'm going to kind of share with you data that I've collected. As Greg says, I have a lot of test subjects that come through my lab. And some of this stuff is really well-vetted research that I submit to IRBs and I try and send to conferences and journals. And other of it is just like random one-off stuff where I grab a student and bring him in, or I grab a golfer and kind of see what I see. But what I really want to focus a lot on is this concept of pre, post, in various situations. So the idea of not just testing once, but testing again, and kind of what I've learned over the last few years as I've tested and then retested golfers on some of these things. So I do want to make sure that as we start talking about grip, just because I know we'll have some fitness professionals in here, some medical people, some golf professionals. So just to be really clear with some of the definitions, when I talk about grip strength, I'm going to be talking specifically about just a measured amount of force applied statically. So that's done with a handheld dynamometer. I will say it is the one device that I think, as crazy and chaotic as TPI gets, it is the one device that Greg can always find that quickly. And it's easy to measure and it's cheap. When we talk about grip pressure, this is where I think things can get a little bit murky. So for today's presentation, I'll talk about it a little bit in the concept of balance of pressure between lead and trail hands in a swing, maybe a percentage of maximum capacity, like how much out of 10 is someone actually applying during a swing, a little bit of a graphical representation of some of these pressure or force traces, and I want to just make sure really clearly what it is not, and I apologize if you maybe thought this was it. I'm not going to be talking about strong and weak grips from a golf coach's perspective. Strong basically just means you can squeeze this device harder. Weak means you can't squeeze it very hard, okay, for today's. So when it comes to grip strength, I kind of have three questions here. Question one is, why would we train it? Question two is, how would we train it? And then I think the third, and maybe this is a question that I'm kind of excited about with some of the data I've been trying to collect, is what would it change if we did these things? So the why of would we train it, this came from a research study I did last summer. I basically set up shop at a golf tournament. It was a fundraiser golf tournament. I went on a par 4. I set up a TrackMan. I had a dynamometer. Everyone had to squeeze the dynamometer, hit in front of the TrackMan. Everyone used drivers, and this is about 100 golfers, males and females, low handicaps, high handicaps, young people, old people, and a pretty good data set. And what you can see here is kind of this, at least a little bit of a trend for grip strength related to club head speed. Now, again, my statistics professors in my graduate school programs definitely pounded into my head that correlation is for sure not causation, but there is a correlation here. Now, again, grip strength is also shown to be correlated with overall strength. But again, there are going to be those people that you might expect to have a lot or a little, and they might surprise you. Case in point was our 91-year-old friend at the start of the study who could kind of really squeeze pretty hard for a 91-year-old. So a little bit of correlation to grip strength. If we want to dive a little bit further into grip strength, and this is some data from TPI and from Catalyst Golf Academy, and then even my own measurements that I've dumped in here, and really the important thing to see is a trend for sure of better players tending to have higher grip strength and faster players tending to have higher grip strength. And you can see that here with those long drive players kind of really being able to produce a lot of static grip strength in kilograms, all the way down to our female amateur golfers. And so again, better players at least tend to we see a little bit more grip strength. Now, I actually like to go to the opposite end of the spectrum as well to start to think about this question. Now, a lot of you maybe have that weekly round of golf that you play with your friends or your buddies. My weekly round of golf, I'm pretty fortunate. Mine is a 3-generation weekly round of golf. So every Monday I get to go out with my parents and my children. And so these are kind of just some pictures from our most recent round. I was able and fortunate enough to get both of my parents on this round and 4 of my 6 children, which I know is for another conversation. But again, remember, I am from Utah. So what I start to notice here is when I watch my mom and dad play golf, and we go to the end of the spectrum of someone who really does lack grip strength, there's all sorts of things that you can very quickly see that start to happen in their golf game and swing that is detrimental to their performance. My mom is the perfect example. She has a little bit of hand arthritis, really weak grip strength, and I watch her swing. That handle will twist at the top. It's really hard for her to get out of the rough, to the point now where when I drive up in front, I just throw her ball into the fairway. And I think we really understand that when we see grip strength really low, that it influences performance. But I'm here to say that I think it's important as well for those who have kind of average or a little bit below average grip strength. There could be a big benefit to getting them just a little bit more for some of the things that we see in the golf swing. Now, if we decide that we think grip strength is somewhat important, it kind of rises us at question 2, which is, well, how would we do it? How would we train grip strength? And so with this, I'd like to bring in our resident expert, Dr. Greg Rose, and say his famous words, lift heavy shit, right? That's what you do. And this is entirely true. I would not argue with this at all, but I would add kind of just 4 caveats to that, which is, well, when you're lifting all this heavy stuff, straps versus no straps, what about isolated grip strength training in addition to maybe some of the other training that you're going to be doing? The use of fat grips, and even the use of training what I would call like polling mechanics, proper mechanics. And with this, I was fortunate enough to engage a little bit with Spencer Tatum, a great trainer. And we were talking a little bit about John Rahm, who has insane grip strength. That probably won't surprise you that he squeezes about 82 kilograms, which again, from an average standpoint, that puts him right up there with the long drive guys. And he's improved that by about 25-ish kilograms in his time working with Spencer. And I asked Spencer what he did, and he said, it was everything. It was fat grips, it was no straps or gloves ever, and then it was really a lot about transmitting force through the hand, helping John understand how to translate that tension throughout the hands. And then he sent me this video of John, again, no grips, no straps, pulling 405 on the trap bar for a set of 5, right? So again, this is the concept, right? You got to lift heavy stuff. That's for sure something that you need to do to be able to train grip strength. Now, if you can't convince your golfer to lift heavy stuff, there are some alternatives, but I like to dive into the research. It's something that I really enjoy. Unfortunately, when we start to look at the effects of lifting straps, most of the research is focused on the muscles of the exercise we're primarily doing. So if I have someone come in and do a deadlift, I don't want the rate limiting factor to be their grip. So I say, hey, if you use these grip straps or use this alternating grip or whatever it might be, I can get a little bit more coming from the legs, and so let's use straps. And so all the research is really kind of centered around what's the activation of the the glute muscles? What are the activations in a lat pull down for the lats if I use straps? And they show this improvement in muscle activation. Very little is actually done to see what actually happens at the forearm and the grip if we use straps versus not use straps. So I did find one study that basically looked at this principle where they had people set 1 RMs of a deadlift, and they looked at with straps, without straps, and then they did sets both with and without straps. And basically what they did here is they measured what happens to the grip itself, the grip strength, in between sets. So they'd give them a dynamometer at the start, have them do the set either with or without straps, and then they would remeasure the grip strength after to see kind of the fatigue of these muscles, at least a way to suggest those muscles might be working a little bit harder during this activity than that. The curve or the lines on the far left, this is them without straps. And so you can see from set 1 to 2 and then for sure to 3, a big drop in the grip strength compared to the middle section when they were doing things with straps, where you actually see a slight uptick in kind of grip strength. So a little bit going on, but not enough to really actually fatigue the muscles. Now, does this mean that the muscles are going to get stronger or weaker as a result of straps or not? And that's research that I don't find a lot of out there. This group actually says, and I threw this quote up there, just a little bit of conflicting information on does resistance training on its own help with grip strength. And so what they basically suggest is, hey, if your desire is increasing grip strength, you better supplement with grip-specific exercises, whether that be farmer's walks, the fat grips, isolated grip strength training as a way to kind of enhance what you're getting from your athletes. Now, if we've decided those are some ways that it could change, then the question is, well, what would it change for the golfer? What would be their benefit? And so with this, I was actually able to work with my good friend Paxton. He's in Louisiana, and he has a similar device I have, which is this device that I have pictured here on the right, which is from Sensor Edge. And it's basically a little bit of a force plate inside of a golf grip, right? It's measuring some things with some pressure sensors and some force sensors. And so him and I kind of grabbed a group of people, threw them on these devices. He was training some, I was training some. For this project, we ended up using the SuperSpeed squeeze, which is basically like a fat grip that goes around your golf club, and you can kind of train golf grip that way. It almost tricks a golfer into thinking that they're just playing golf, while in fact they're actually training grip strength. And not shockingly, when you train grip strength does go up. That's a stimulus that works very well. But what we wanted to again understand was what's happening in the handle dynamically. So I will say with this, the data I'm going to show you here I think probably led to more questions than it did answers, which I think is okay from a research standpoint. But I think it did at least lead to a few answers and thoughts that Paxton and I have that I wanted to share. So this is at least, again, and they just told me they updated their software, so I'm old software from like a week and a half ago. But this is typically what you would kind of see from this, and just to orient you, in the bottom left is just kind of a heat map of where the pressure is actually being applied on the grip. And this is during a driver swing, right? We can actually hook them up. We have them take a swing, actually hit a golf ball with this club. If we kind of move over, you can see kind of this lead trail. Oh, I'm just like Scott did earlier. We have this kind of lead trail type 80-20. That's kind of the pressure distribution from the left to the right. Sorry, that was a 60-40. And then underneath on the white, we have the percentage of their maximum that they're doing. So this would be that idea of this person is about a 2 out of 10 on the lead and a 2-ish out of 10 on the trail, maybe a little more on the lead. And what we basically saw with these golfers, and again, every golfer is going to use a little bit of a different pattern at the grip. Commonalities are we typically see a peak value occur kind of early after transition, early downswing to really get that club to change directions. And so what we really saw, and this is really scientific, what I'm about to say, is the curves got a little more smooth. You can kind of see little blips, little places where it's kind of a little bit jagged. And what we see first and foremost is just the smoothness of the curvatures, a little bit maybe more stability through the handle. And then the other thing you see with this player is actually a little bit more of a separation from lead to trail. The red curve is the lead hand pressure, and the green is the trail hand pressure. So a little bit more of a separation, a little more coming from the lead, which we tend to see in better players, a little less coming from the trail, and a smoother graph. I'm excited to take this to the next step and pair this with my kinematic and kinetic systems and kind of see what's now happening at the club face, with the ball, with the forces. But this is kind of an initial finding we saw with this. Another thing that I always like to look at is how maybe individuals that have seemingly some similar characteristics and some different characteristics, how does that change the way that they might move and apply these forces? So this was two golfers who, similar heights, similar builds, one a little bit older than the other one, but almost identical club head speeds. And kind of going over what you can see is that our top golfer, he had quite a bit more dynamometer grip strength. He was able to squeeze about 64 kilograms, whereas the bottom one was 42 and change for kilograms. Now, when you utilize that sensor edge device to kind of collect the data, you can also get a little bit of a measurement during a calibration of not just kind of the squeeze of the dynamometer, but how they circularly apply pressure and force. And that's something that I'm now collecting both of those together and trying to look at the relationships between what someone might do on a dynamometer versus what they actually might do on a golf grip. Again, I have a lot more to do on that to understand what's kind of going on there, but you can see both of them were able to produce a little bit more there. For sure, the bottom one, he jumped up quite a bit more. The one that I think is kind of interesting are those last two, which is what's kind of their max during a swing, and then their percent max during a swing. So if this is what they can do statically, how much do they get to when they're actually making a swing? And so one of them is a little more than 40 kilograms, one of them is a little less than 40 kilograms. But the one who's stronger, what you can see is that their percent max ends up being like a 5.7 out of 10 versus an 8 out of 10. Okay? I think there's a couple important things to look at, and again, this is the maximum amount. I just went behind kind of the data set, pulled out some raw data. This is the maximum time. So 5.7 out of 10 and 8 out of 10. The person with the stronger grip was able to do less pressure to achieve the same club head speed as the one with a weaker grip. Is that a good thing? I want to say yes, right? I want to say that having a little bit less tension there can be a beneficial thing for that player, a little bit more to utilize for closure of club face and release and things like that. Again, I feel like I need a little bit more data there, but I think this is important to see, especially that max value during the swing. I've talked to a few of you at some of the booths where you're having this argument with people who say, well, grip strength isn't that important. You know, I'm not supposed to squeeze the club very hard anyway. I'm not supposed to kill that baby bird. Again, I'm here to tell you if your max during the swing is 39 or 44 kilograms, like, the bird's dead, right? And even if that club head speed was lower, that 39 is not all of a sudden going to become 5, right? These are big values in the golf swing that happen. And these are their two curves kind of set on top of each other. Again, stronger player on the left, a little bit of a weaker grip player on the right. You can see the stronger player a little bit more in the lead than in the trail. And then the big one is those white percentages. So these white percentages, you just see a little bit more of a percentage of their max that's actually occurring for that player who's weaker in his grip strength compared to the one who's a little bit stronger. Again, potentially a little bit less tension. To me, I think what that means is that when that player maybe gets into a time where they maybe actually do need to apply a little bit more force, say they're maybe really trying to come through some heavy rough or something like that, they have something in reserve to actually utilize to execute that task. Again, thinking back to my mom, who really lacks the grip strength, we understand that her at maximum capacity really limits her ability to do some of those things. I think this kind of shows that as well. Right? So these are some of the things that I'm kind of diving into and have understood a little bit with a lot more to understand as it relates to the handle. Now, if we can flip to kind of the other connection point, and this is really where probably my true passion lies, it's where a lot of my research has centered with golf and with other sports as well, is the connection with the ground reaction force. And again, I've been in here already and heard things related to teaching a little bit, and what I really want to do with the ground reaction force is actually share with you 3 things that I've kind of been looking at as of recent. The first is what actually happens to the ground reaction force over the course of a round of golf. The second one is just ensuring how do we match up like physical traits and some of the TPI power tests that were spoken of earlier this morning to ground reaction force curves. And then kind of what does that mean for some training and coaching implications. So this is actually a study we just completed 3 weeks ago. This was an encore study that I did in collaboration with some of the other professors in my department at Utah Valley University, mainly centered with my good friend Dr. Andrew Creer, who specializes in sports nutrition. And as we worked with our men's golf team, we realized that for players who like to walk, and for sure players who walk and carry their bag or push their bag, and for sure players who do it over and over again, and definitely with our men's golf team who often are playing 36 holes in one day, we wanted to understand, is their nutrition on the course inhibiting or helping maybe some of the things that they might do? So we literally did everything, and that's why we grabbed all these other professors, because we thought, if we're going to be out on a golf course for 5.5 hours collecting data, let's collect everything we can. And so we did kind of outcome measures of urine analysis for hydration. We did have to make sure we specified in the IRB that they were not being drug tested. That was for sure a concern, which I did report to the coach who he should be concerned about. Definitely not. Caloric and macro intake, so looking at their ratio of carbs to proteins to fats, and in just their caloric intake on the golf course. We did some psychological changes, and then for me, the exciting thing was actually to see what happens to the ground reaction force over the course of an 18-hole round. So all of this data was collected speed-wise with TrackMan, so I took the TrackMan out there, and then I used the Smart2Move portable force plates so I could take them out and just assess them at kind of different points on the golf course. So the 2 times where I assessed ground reaction force and speed together, one was just on the driving range right before they're going out on the round, and I gave them the same instruction there that I did on the post analysis. Now the post analysis was on 17T. It was basically a place where we could hit a golf ball and not really care about where it went, and so it wasn't an encore shot. It was definitely considered a practice shot, so we were trying to match that stimulus as much as possible, but late in the round. You might ask, well, Tyler, why didn't you just do it on the driving range post? Well, when we got there the day of, they had closed the driving range at like 4 o'clock, so we were a little bit limited there. But again, end of round versus beginning of round. Club head speed changes very different, almost identical on the driving range versus on 17T. So their speeds didn't really drop at all. But as I dove into their ground reaction force changes, that's where things got a little bit interesting. So again, these players are at least achieving the same speeds. When I looked at vertical ground reaction force, and these are all peak values, the up and down, of the 7, I had 8 start the study, only 7 finished because one was hit by one of his teammates on hole 11 and had to withdraw from the round. So, hit by a golf ball, I should say. Hit by a golf ball. The vertical ground reaction force, 3 of the 7, that vertical ground reaction force went lower. 2 of them, it actually went a little bit higher, and 2 of them, it had no change. So it was kind of like, well, I don't know what there is there. There's a lot of whatever there. It was the next 2 that I thought, man, these are really kind of interesting. So trail leg lateral, and Dr. Lin did a wonderful job talking about trail leg lateral and the importance of these side-to-side forces. Remember, trail leg lateral is in the backswing. I'm trying to use that leg pushing away from the target to create that really nice force to create my motion forward. Every single one of them had a decrease in that force of the peak value. And on average, it was about 5% less body weight. Now, in terms of how much is that, well, if we want someone to be in the 20 to 25% range with that trail leg lateral, dropping 5% is a huge drop. That's almost a 20-25% drop in that force at the end of a round. The one that they actually increased was these kind of horizontal plane rotations, or those kind of rotational torques. All of them actually increased, and they increased by a magnitude about 21.5 Newton meters per kg. That's basically a torque value that was normalized to body mass. And again, a 21 unit increase is literally like a 20% increase in this value at the end of the round. So basically they're losing some of the lateral, and I think Greg would decide that as that's our rock and roller. We're losing a little bit of rock and roll, and we're getting a little bit more of it's not the shimmy, the twists. We're losing a little rock and roll, and we're getting a little more twist is kind of what happened. This was a player that I've worked with a lot, so I talked to him after the round. So this is in pre-round. And basically what I've done here is I've just gone to his moment of peak vertical force. So peak vertical force, pre-round he was at 217% of his body weight. This is a really good vertical player. Post-round he went to 174% of his body weight. So a big decrease, 217, 174. For sure I will agree that his vertical force post-round is a little bit earlier in the swing, which I think helps him definitely utilize a little bit more of that for swing speed. But that's a big drop. That's a big drop for this player. If you look at his kind of horizontal plane rotation, here he went from 84 newton meters per kg all the way up to 106 newton meters per kg. So big change for him right there. 22, and if he started at 84, now we're talking about a 25-ish% more that he's getting in that rotational torque to create clubhead speed. His clubhead speeds were almost identical. I asked him after the round, I kind of showed him some of this data, and he said, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I said, well, why doesn't that surprise you? He said, because my legs get tired at the end of the round and I don't want to push. I said, okay, talk to me a little bit about your end of round ball shape. Talk to me a little bit about the end of the 36-hole round on the Mondays that you're playing in your college golf tournaments. And he said, oh, I feel like I lose a lot of balls really far left. And I think all of a sudden here's a player who at the end of his rounds he's starting to utilize a different parameter of the forces to create the same amount of speed. You can imagine how difficult that would be for a player to then match up the swing plane and the club face to actually get that ball where they want to go. What does this mean for training? I think for sure it means if you're working with golfers who are walking a lot, who are playing competitively, understanding the fatigue that their muscles might get over the course of a 4 or 5 hour round walking, how it will influence their ground reaction forces, maybe not show up on their speed in terms of their speeds dropping, but the way they generate that speed is changing. I think it's something for sure to be aware of. The second one is just a match up to physical force. So for this one, I actually worked with our women's golf team. And this is one where we brought them all in at the start of a season, did baseline TPI power testing, and then basically threw them on the force plates to see what kind of matchup there was for these athletes. And so here's their data. And again, Greg just kind of updated. LPGA averages tend to be somewhere in the 18 range for these. Again, inches for height, feet for throws. And then you kind of would get an average of 18. So what you can see is, yeah, we've got some gals who are just a little bit below 18, a lot of 17, some 16, some that are a little bit weaker. What I really want to do with this is kind of dive in and see, well, how does it work percent of their own average versus percent of LPGA average? So if you take their jump height and you see, well, where does their jump height rank compared to what they can do in a seated throw or a sit-up and throw? What I found, and all I really need to point out is on that very left-hand column, we see a lot of positive values, right? Meaning, at least for this group, their legs tended to be a little bit more powerful than the core, a little bit more powerful than the arms. Not a huge shock with our female golfers, okay? As you start moving over, yeah, some of them for sure weaker than average of LPGA, but as you start moving to the right, those numbers get more and more negative. So to me, all this said was I've got a group of girls that at least initially, one of the ways that they're going to be able to generate power and speed is going to be with vertical force in the golf swing. Unfortunately, when I put many of them on the force plates, I think all but besides 2 of them really struggled utilizing the vertical force in the golf swing. And in fact, some of our highest jumpers, our almost 20-inch jumpers, were some of the ones who had the worst vertical force in the golf swing, which let me know that there's for sure the capacity, they just don't really know how to do it. Okay? And this is something I see a lot in female golfers that I've worked with. This is one who was at my lab last week, and she is kind of a similar athlete profile where her vertical jump was almost 21 inches. Her seated throws and chest passes were also far as well, but her power source definitely was her legs. Her legs were her incredible power source. And she had this swing that she says just over time had been grooved into this really aesthetically pleasing rotational swing, focusing on positions, and all of a sudden we throw her on the force plates and see that she's producing at her peak about 163% of her body weight in vertical force. Now to put that in context, my dad that I play golf with every Monday, and he'd be okay with me saying this, frankly has a hard time standing up and sitting down out of a chair, he can produce 168% of his body weight in vertical force. So we've got my 78-year-old dad who's doing more vertical force than this athlete who can jump 21 inches, and we think there's for sure a disconnect here. And we basically coached every bit of athleticism out of this player because we didn't want her to use her legs to get really aggressive with her lower body in the swing. So we went through a series of drills, some of the golf jumps that if you've been at TPI, you've seen Greg walk through those, some use with the force pedals and really trying to learn how to activate some of that vertical force, some of the things that I saw Jason just show earlier. And in literally 10, 12 minutes, we were able to get her from 163 to 211 because she had the capacity, right? She had it in there. Now, again, she's for sure late on her vertical force. That's a whole other thing that we've got to go down. But being able to go from 163 to 211 and then to see a club head speed increase of about 6 or 7 miles per hour with this player, I mean, that's a huge win for this player, right? Huge win for this player. So this is just kind of my thing to say, make sure that as we physically test, we're matching up kind of what they're doing in the golf swing with what are their physical capacities. And if you do anything with female golfers, utilize their legs. Utilize their legs to push vertically. In my experience, that tends to be something that they are really good at from a physical standpoint and for whatever reason are just not very good at in a golf swing. Okay? Let them use their legs. Okay? The last one I want to talk about is this concept of training the ground reaction force. So maybe either from a gym type setting or even as a coach on the range. And I picked this image mainly because I think when you're looking at ground reaction force curves, we can start to think about, well, what's the egg, what's the chicken, and are they both, and what do we really want to happen? And I think what we really need to understand is we've got to find for sure what the chicken is so that we can change what we want to change what that golfer wants to change. So a player came into me, and this is a high-level player looking to gain just a little bit of club head speed. And I would say if we come here, his egg for sure was, Tyler, if I could hit it 10 yards farther, that would make a huge difference for me. I would no longer be losing strokes to the field. I would be able to be almost even money, and I feel like the rest of my game could make up for it. When he came into me, his stock driver speed was 113 miles per hour, and if he Kyle Berkshired it, that's the way he said it, he could push it up to about 116. And he wanted to be just a little bit faster, 3-4 miles per hour. That's what he wanted. So immediately that was his egg. For sure it was his egg. I have a bad habit, and this is probably as a biomechanist. My bad habit is I always think the egg is a prettier force curve. Prettier force curves really mean nothing if you can't actually get the golf club and the golf ball to do the things that they want them to do. And so I had to understand that his egg for sure was going to be the club head speed. So he came in, and what I'm depicting right here is, again, some of those rotational torques that are taking place. And what jumped out to me was if we're looking for just a little bit of miles per hour, we need to look at every single thing. And so this here was good values, right? He ended up being able to create a fair amount, 114 Newton meters per mass, but he was doing it a little bit late. I wanted it just a few frames earlier so he could leverage some of that to actually deliver it to the club and then to the ball. And then the same thing was true for his vertical force, right? I'm just going to his maximum total vertical force, which is about 180% here. And again, just a little bit late. I want to move this up just a little bit. Now, you start to think about, well, what is it that's actually causing this? Why is his vertical force a little bit low? And what that led me to was a variable that I'm getting really excited about as of late, and it's called impulse. Now, impulse is simply a measurement of force applied over a period of time. So if I take the exact same force, but I apply it over a longer period of time, I've just created a larger impulse. That impulse goes to actually change the momentum and the motion of the individual. So larger impulse means larger motion, larger quantity of motion. And in this scenario, there's two ways we can increase impulse. One is we crank up the force. The other one is we turn on that force a little bit earlier and leverage this concept of time to be able to build that impulse. So this is a player who, his lateral force was decent. I think he peaked around 14-15% body weight. Again, I would like it to be a little bit more, but I just wanted it to turn on a little bit earlier. So if you look at the graph on the left, What I really was looking at on the left was I'm looking at kind of this build and then drop. And I'm looking at the red value, right? He kind of builds between those two yellows and then he drops. And what I want him to do is build and hang on to it as long as he can. And then he can go ahead and drop once he's utilized that force. And so we worked through some lateral force progressions. So doing some of the jumps that Jason was showing, getting him to kind of get into that side and get off as much as he can and as quickly as we can. A lot of counter rotation stuff where our club's in front and we're trying to help feel that push really hard as the club passes. We were doing the drills. I was asking him, hey, how does this feel? Is it any different than what you've done before? And he said something that I thought was great. I wish I would have been recording it on my phone. He said, Tyler, I just feel like I have a lot more time to build up my speed. And I said, you've literally just described impulse. That's what you've done. You do have more time to build up that speed. So we measured them, and that's my favorite thing about being able to use something like a force plate is it's incredibly fast. I don't have to go through this process of the markers or tethering them to things and the post-processing, which again has its place for sure. But this is my very fastest way to understand. I think I heard Greg say this morning, starting with the ground reaction force and the kinetics is an easy way to start. And if those look crummy, great, let's clean them up. And if those look great, then let's dive into the other ways and really understand it. So when I saw this, I said, hey, let's give it a try and then let's see if it does anything. And so what ended up happening is I pulled out this impulse value basically between when the club starts to move and kind of when the club head is changing directions. That just ended up being a point that was kind of easy to detect right around transition. And you can see that his impulse value went from 8.1 to 9. On the trail leg, 4.7 to 5.8 total. So more impulse. And again, these are big percentages. 4.7 to 5.8 ends up being, again, a little over 20% more impulse, which means more quantity of motion. Remember, this lateral motion is going to help create some shift forward that hopefully improves the timing of his other forces, which hopefully improves his club head speed, right, which is the end goal. So here's his pre-rotational torques, his rotational motion here. You can see where it's peaking. And if I just go back and forth, well, what happened? Well, we went from here in the swing to here in the downswing. We got earlier. We got earlier rotational torques. The number, I should have put the number up there because he actually also went from like 114 to 133. Part of that is we worked a little bit on where he was actually pushing with that trail leg, helping with point of application of the ground reaction force. And so that actually helped him leverage some of these anterior-posterior forces to get a little bit of a better rotation. So again, earlier with this horizontal plane rotation, here's his vertical force pre. So here is it pre, here it is post. Again, pre here, post here. Our goal was earlier. We get these forces earlier, they're good magnitudes, let's just get them earlier. And we could then get a little bit more energy out to the club head speed. So on this swing right here, he was actually able to just kind of effortlessly, I can't even say that word, without any effort, let's say that. He was able to do that with, he was able to get to about 116.3 miles per hour. Remember, pre-training, that was his Kyle Berkshire, and his new Kyle Berkshire swing was 118.5. And when he saw that number pop up, I said, hey, is that a good number? And he said, if I was by myself, I'd take a picture. And I said, you can take a picture, that's fine with me. We had achieved what the egg really was, which was we want that club head speed. We need 3 or 4 more miles per hour because that's going to translate to the 10 more yards. That's going to be the difference maker for me next year when I'm out there playing. And we utilized force plates as a way to not just assess what he was doing, but then reassess what we were doing with his training modalities in this situation to ensure we were changing the force pattern with the drills we were giving him, potentially with the exercise that he now has to do in between when he left and when I will see him again, and we're able to then achieve that result that we were hoping for. Again, this is a really powerful thing. Again, I have a $250,000 motion capture system behind him that you don't see. None of that was working currently at this time, frankly, because this was the fastest and easiest place to start, and we found something there. In the future, we'll probably dive into a little bit more, but this is a great place to start that allowed him to get that extra speed. So, just kind of some take-home messages. And I would say this top one is one that I think is just a truth here, is just mostly everyone could benefit from a bit more grip strength. And again, making sure in communication, that doesn't mean most everyone could benefit from gripping the club a little bit tighter, though I think some people could. But they definitely could benefit from a bit more grip strength. And remember, we understand this with really low grip strengths. It's true with those people who are just kind of the average or a little bit below average. We could definitely help them with a little bit more grip strength. Second one, measure everything and remeasure. Obviously, that's something, as I've been able to spend time at TPI over the last 3 or 4 years, that's something that they've just ingrained in my head, right? We measure, right? We measure, and then we remeasure, and we do it again. And hopefully some of the things that I showed you here were kind of some new ideas of measuring and remeasuring. Definitely match body and body capacity to the force and the motion, right? As we make these physical tests, making sure that then they're utilizing these superpowers in the swing itself, in what we see in the kinetics and the kinematics. And then that last one is make sure we know the egg, and then make sure we do our best to find the chicken, right? Don't get so focused on whatever is the metric is that you think is important. For me, it's a beautiful ground reaction force curve, but you have to understand what it is for that golfer so that you can detect that and then make that change that they want to make. So that's everything. Again, appreciate being here, and we probably have a couple minutes for questions.
Got some questions for Dr. Collins?
Yeah, great question. The question was, again, related to impulse, right? They're happening fast. This is what I will say. In the downswing, we know they're happening fast. And so in my mind, what we have to do to increase impulses in the downswing is we have to leverage the fact that our backswings do take a little bit longer time. So with this player, it was that idea of like, what's happening is he's not really turning on lateral force till here. Let's just turn it on right here, right? I think of this with any other sport, right? If I'm playing basketball, I don't stand there and then when the offensive player moves, I'm like, oh, right? That's not how it works. It should be the same way in the golf swing. So I think that's a way that we can leverage that time principle in the backswing that then we'll flip over and translate to the downswing, because there's no way in a downswing I'm going to say, hey, let's increase impulse by swinging slower, right? So, and then I think also Dr. Lin this morning talking about some of the neurological stimulus we can get from a gym setting. I think that's a great way to improve rates of force development, to be able to turn on those forces a little bit faster. Yeah. Whew, man, that's such a good question. And I'm willing to say, can I say an I don't know and then give at least some thoughts I have?
So, if you go over the sensor the rail there has some of the preliminary data numbers on altitude constraints for everything we've got, even like which part of the grip is being applied.
And I should say here, is Liam here already for, because, okay, yeah. I was going to say, I've done a little bit of that. We tend to see more in the lead than the trail for sure. I think we tend to want to see, you know, if they're at a 9.9 out of 10 every time they're moving at peak, I think we've got some issues, right? I think if you're really interested in those grip dynamics, Liam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing you're going to dive into that in a lot of great detail. I think so. I hope so. He hopes so. So. Liam is a guy, we actually got to connect with him and Carson a couple years ago and start comparing data. He's much further along in that specific thing than I am, and I'm totally willing to admit that. So.
It's definitely one of those areas that, like I said this morning, we're collecting data on now.
Yep.
We don't have enough to be able to think enough to be dangerous, but not enough to say it out loud yet. So I'll let Ron do that. Well, I think we got time for one more. One?
How earlier is earlier? Yeah, good question. I think especially with I don't know if I've ever seen a player at least come through my lab that's been too early. There's no such thing. So I would say early or better. Like I want players, especially with that lateral force, at setup, I'll even put on live mode of the force plates. Like engage your feet before the club even moves. Watch that force happen, and then all of a sudden, hey, I'm already in the position where I've turned it on, and that's probably not even early enough.
Our long drive players are creating lateral resistance before they take the club.
Yeah.
Literally, you're seeing impulse go out before the club's done.
Yep.
Crazy.
Yep.
For most amateurs, it's like when it's out of that.
Yep. Always earlier. Always earlier.